Welcome to the Bible Forum. We're every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. You can join us live in the chat room, or you can do what you're doing now, probably on YouTube or Facebook, or maybe from the website, thebibleforum.net. Last week, President Trump, after warning that Iran would pay a very big price, authorized a drone strike at Baghdad International Airport. They killed Iran's top general and second most powerful official, Qasem Soleimani. Many were members of Kataib Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran. And none of this happened in a vacuum. It was not a rogue president flexing his muscles, but rather it came after the airport attack and after Iran ramped up their efforts in Iraq by attacking our embassy there. Military and civilian analysts concluded that Iran was on a path to greater destruction and capitalization in the region, something that had to be stopped before it got out of control. Critics claim our actions will serve to spin things out of control. However, all it will do is bring this whole thing to a head. How? We're not quite sure how. But decades of American activity over there hasn't done the trick. All we have done is to embolden them. We sent them dozens of pallets of American cash, Iran, under Obama, simply to appease them. We have looked the other way for decades in order to appease. And the question becomes, so how did that work? Soleimani had cost hundreds of American lives and was among the Middle East's most feared powers. Iran seemed certain to respond, potentially further destabilizing the world's most volatile region. In killing General Soleimani, the New York Times reports Trump took an action which Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama had rejected, fearing it would lead to war between the United States and Iran. Someone else said, from the Pentagon statement, at the direction of the president, the U.S. military has taken decisive defensive action to protect U.S. personnel abroad by killing Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Islamic Revolutionary Corps Quds Force, a U.S. designated foreign terrorist organization. As I've told you before, the word Quds is the word for Jerusalem. These are Muslims. Their goal is to run Israel off the planet and take over Israel. He's in charge of that. Jonathan Tobin is editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, and he writes of Soleimani on January 3rd, saying, for 20 years he had sowed terror and confusion throughout the Middle East with impunity. As head of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Soleimani was the mastermind of the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, as well as the second most powerful person within that oppressive Islamic theocracy. No matter how much mayhem he spread, he believed he was untouchable. And 3 American administrations run by both Democrats and Republicans validated that belief, foregoing opportunities to kill the man who had the blood of many Americans and countless Syrians, Lebanese, Israelis, and others on his hands. But following the orchestration of attacks on American forces in Iraq and the staging of an assault on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, Soleimani's get-out-of-jail-free card that he'd been given by the international community and successive American presidents expired. Behind the scenes, we have President Trump demonstrating his commitment to singling out key leaders in the Middle East and eliminating them when possible. It's called cutting the head off. In this case, the head of the operation. A source in close contact with Trump administration senior national security officials told Axios.com that one scenario they're especially concerned about and have been prepared for is Iran launching cyber attacks. That's the most likely way Iran could retaliate stateside. The big picture is the president who wanted to bring home the troops is now engaged in the most intense conflict with Iran in recent history, wanting to let others fight it out in the sand, he is now adding forces, and they're coming back on a war footing. Trump now has to prepare for an extreme backlash from Iran and likely intensified attacks on U.S. forces in the Middle East and anywhere else within Iran's planning reach. Axios contributor Barak Ravid believes that this also means possible retaliation against U.S. allies, especially Israel. He writes, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu cut short a trip to Greece to return to Israel to monitor the situation. It's still unclear if the U.S. gave Israel any heads up before the strike. Israeli officials tell Ravid that Israel doesn't know if and how Iran would retaliate, but right now the decision is to keep a low profile and not get involved in the ongoing tensions in Iraq. CFR President Richard Haass tweeted this week, "Make no mistake, any war with Iran will not look like the 1990 Gulf War or the 2003 Iraq wars. It will be fought throughout the region with a wide range of tools and a wide range of civilian, economic, and military targets. The region and possibly the world will be the battlefield." The bottom line, President Trump suddenly faces two global crises in North Korea and Iran via Iraq, both with the real possibility of U.S. military action, if not outright war. And modern wars are fought mostly with the most expensive, most difficult to recruit, train, and retain special forces. Trump has benefited from relative peace abroad and prosperity at home. But now Iran-backed militiamen attacked the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, Iraq on Wednesday for the second day in a row. North Korea's Kim Jong-un is threatening to resume nuclear missile testing and said he'll soon introduce, quote, a new strategic weapon, end of quote, as the momentum of the past few years has stalled. He declared in a New Year's speech that there will never be denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula unless the U.S. drops its hostile policies. That, according to state media. And don't forget, Russia said last week that it had deployed a hypersonic nuclear missile that President Vladimir Putin claims is in a class of its own, fueling concerns of a new arms race with the U.S. The storming of the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad has launched one of the biggest foreign policy crises of the Trump presidency and in the last 20 years. Trump tweeted on Tuesday afternoon, Iran will be held fully responsible for lives lost or damage incurred at any of our facilities. They will pay a very big price. This is not a warning. It is a threat. Happy New Year. Initially, 120 Marines were rushed to Baghdad, the most since ISIS was at its peak. Trump tweeted, to those many millions of people in Iraq who want freedom and who don't want to be dominated and controlled by Iran, this is your time. The Iraqi parliament passed a resolution Sunday calling on the government to expel U.S. troops from their country. The legal basis for the U.S. presence in Iraq is that it comes at Iraq's invitation. This vote does not formally revoke that invitation, but it is a step along that path. A U.S. exit from Iraq would ultimately be one of the most consequential results of Soleimani's killing, because it would significantly hamper the fight against ISIS and achieve a major Iranian objective. Iraqi Prime Minister Abdul Mahdi said Iraq cannot accept a political assassination on its soil. He called the attack a grave violation of Iraqi sovereignty. He also revealed that Soleimani was in Baghdad at the time of his killing to meet with him and relay Iran's response to a Saudi request for dialogue. Mahdi noted that he had personally worked to defuse the protests outside the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad earlier in the week, going so far as to threaten to step down if the militia behind the protests did not disperse. President Trump thanked him for that effort. He said, at the same time, he was planning an attack inside Iraq without permission. Mahdi, who resigned in November amid mass protests in Iraq but remains a caretaker prime minister, previously warned that President Trump's decision would light the fuse of war. Here at home, U.S. military leaders seem to be stunned that Trump gave the order to kill Soleimani, a step they viewed as the most extreme response to recent Iranian-led violence in Iraq. Trump administration officials have said that Trump had little choice because Soleimani was planning imminent attacks on U.S. and allied forces in the region, but they have presented no evidence of such plans. The resolution passed today calls not only on U.S. troops to leave Iraq, but the entire international coalition fighting the Islamic State. President Trump may feel compelled to do something because the world's cameras are trained on scenes of American weakness. Trump has privately talked about the weakness he believes President Carter showed in response to the Iranian hostage crisis. On the other hand, Trump has, until his recent retaliatory airstrikes, been reluctant to fight a proxy war against Iran inside Iraq. When Iran shot down a U.S. drone earlier this year, Trump was prepared to strike several Iranian targets, but at the last minute his more dovish instincts kicked in. It was only when Iranian proxies killed a U.S. contractor recently that Trump felt he had no choice but to strike back. Unlike most of his national security team, Trump sees very little value in an American presence in Iraq. If Trump strikes back hard against Iran, he may get a new Middle East war he never wanted. If he does nothing, he may show the Carter-esque weakness he has long derided. But what if Trump made a flip, a decision that goes the other way and totally withdrew American forces from Iraq? The bottom line here is Trump has long wanted out of Iraq and believes the American presence in Iraq is an unmitigated disaster that was the worst mistake in U.S. history. While all this is happening, U.S. airstrikes yesterday were conducted against the bases of pro-Iran forces in Syria and Iraq. And these were welcomed enthusiastically by Israel's government. Prime Minister Netanyahu congratulated Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on the airstrikes in a call yesterday. He had been very concerned by Trump's Iran policies over the past several months, including his efforts to open dialogue, and even more so his restraint after Iranian provocations like September's attack on Saudi oil installations. Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz said Thursday's U.S. airstrikes are a turning point in the regional response to Iran and its proxies. And if Iran fails to understand the power of the U.S., they will be making a big mistake. For America, look for a spate of protests and perhaps even bombings from people who are being cultivated by our enemies. The overt unrest we've seen over the last few years or so is not, by and large, homegrown. At the same time, America has become much more violent in a multitude of ways, and we fool ourselves if we think all this is simply organic. Evil forces are at work around the globe. Why not here? The enemy of our soul does not sleep. His focus is on those who represent and or illustrate Christian values. These threaten the enemies of peace, just as they do the enemies of God. Official operatives and willing dupes have been stirring up social, political, and religious angst along with our public school system, colleges, and media. Our young people have for the last 50 years been spoon-fed communist and or socialist propaganda in the schools we are forced to support through our taxes. If you are under 50 years of age, you likely have a skewed understanding of what America is and how it works. If you are 30 years of age or younger, you most likely have no idea what America was designed to be. And this is where the real battle is being fought, not in Iraq. Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, China, Korea, all driven by religious values, as are Western nations. Values we in the West do not understand. Values we in the West are shocked by. So keep in mind that the battle is, was, has, always will be between God and those who hate God. And chaos, disruption, and deceit are the tools. Have you noticed? Those who truly know and love God do not exhibit any of these. Chaos, disruption, deceit. The godlessness is why children today are being raised and not nurtured. Stay tuned. Watch what happens.